Hubbards, and classic lighting.
Good evening and welcome to episode 5 of Our Climate Reality, a program that is geared at raising awareness on the very critical issue of climate change. And climate change is here. Last week we looked at the reduction of greenhouse gases, that's the emission of greenhouse gases, and this week we will be discussing climate change and agriculture. Joining us this evening in studio, Ms. Martina Duncan, Mr. Daniel Lewis, and via the Zoom platform, Mr. Steve Maxime. Of course, my co-host Terry Walters is joining us on Zoom this evening. As our climate continues to heat up and the impacts of that warming grow more frequent and severe, farmers and farming communities around the world will be increasingly challenged. And Grenadian farmers won't be spared the damage that climate change is already beginning to inflict. In fact, the model that dominates our nation's agriculture, a model that neglects soils, reduces diversity, and relies too heavily on fertilizers and pesticides, makes Grenadian farms susceptible to climate impacts in several ways. The combination of advancing climate change and an already vulnerable industrial system is a perfect storm that threatens farmers' livelihoods and our food supply. The good news is that there are tools in the form of science-based farming practices that can buffer farmers from climate damage and help make their operations more resilient and sustainable in the long term. But farmers face many obstacles to changing practices. So it's critical that our policymakers shift agriculture investment to support and hasten this transition. When we come back from the break, our guests will introduce themselves and tell you a little about what they do. We'll be back in just a moment.
Our Climate Reality is brought to you with the kind compliments of Republic Bank Limited, Hubbards, and Classic Lighting.
Solar Vision is the champion. We lighten up the old Caribbean. Solar Vision is the champion. We lighten the old Caribbean. The ultimate solution to get rid of pollution. We going green to be healthy. Going green for security. Going green for prosperity. Going green with Solar Vision. We going green.
Available at Grenada Trade Center, Monrouge, St. George. For more information, call 444-5291 or 404-9012.
Have you heard about the new Softweave bathroom tissue with total hygiene? As hygiene and safety have taken center stage, our bathroom tissue is now manufactured with 3 different technologies to offer the best protection for you and your family. UVC light technology for a safe and effective disinfection process, eliminating 99.9% of microorganisms. Also, production at high temperatures, killing all types of germs and bacteria. And it's pH controlled with delicate fibers to prevent irritation for even sensitive skin. Softweave Total Hygiene Bathroom Tissue, available in supermarkets and shops island-wide. Visit Softweave Caribbean Facebook or Instagram pages for more information.
Welcome back, everyone. Episode 5 of Our Climate Reality. This evening we discuss climate change and agriculture. Before we get into our discussion this evening, I will ask our guests to take just 30 seconds to tell us a little bit about themselves. So we'll start in studio, of course, and out of respect, as determined by society. We start with the beautiful lady in studio, Miss Martina Duncan. Martina, good evening and welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Hello, good evening, Godfrey, and good evening to all our listeners and viewers. My name is Martina Duncan, and I am a climate change specialist working with several United Nations organizations on climate change in the Caribbean as well as in Europe and Central Asia region.
Thank you very much. Also in studio, no stranger, Mr. Daniel Lewis. Daniel, good evening and welcome to our Climate Reality.
Good evening, Godfrey, and let me take this opportunity to extend greetings, salutation to your listening public. Well, I'm an agronomist by profession. Yes, I've worked in the agriculture sector in Greenland, specifically in the Ministry of Agriculture. I've retired, but now I do some consultancies and enjoying life.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'll find some work for you, Daniel. Joining us on Zoom this evening, Mr. Steve Maxime. Steve, good evening. Welcome to the program. Tell us a little bit about you.
Good evening to your viewers and listeners. My name is Steve Maxime. I run a small virtual consulting firm where we positively impact the fate of the Caribbean. FATE stands for food, agriculture, tourism, and environment. So those are the 4 sectors I tend to work in.
Thank you very much. And of course, we're looking forward to hearing more from our guests this evening. And of course, Terry, good evening. It's a pleasure to have you with me again this evening.
Yes, thank you very much, Godfrey, and good evening to everyone. It's good to be here.
Yes, indeed. So we're going to start our discussion this evening. We're going to go to Ms. Duncan, and we want to talk a bit about agriculture and how agriculture can contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. We know that agriculture in some ways do impact climate change, and also on the other hand, climate change does impact agriculture. So we're going to start with the contribution to greenhouse gas emissions as it relates to agriculture. Martina, talk to us about this.
Okay, thank you, Godfrey. Are the slides up?
Yes, our slides are ready.
Okay, great, thank you. So when it comes to climate change, agriculture is one of the most important sectors because it's twofold. One, agriculture contributes to climate change, and on the other hand, it is one of the most significantly impacted sectors by climate change. Agriculture contributes to about 25% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And this is just from primary production. It doesn't include the value chain activities, right? So it is a significant amount of the overall emissions from greenhouse gases, which highlights the importance of this sector. So my presentation will go into some of the sources of the greenhouse gas emissions from the agriculture sector, and then some of the activities that farmers and the public can take to reduce the emissions from your agricultural practices. Right, so as I mentioned, agriculture sector, you can have emissions from the primary production as well as the value chain, along the value chain, where in terms of production of goods and services from agriculture produce. Could we move to the next slide, please? So, implications for climate change in regard to agriculture. I'm going to look at the main gases, the main greenhouse gases that are emitted from the agriculture sector. So we have carbon dioxide gas, methane, and nitrous oxide. And some of the activities that contribute to carbon dioxide emissions, we could look at land conversion or land clearing, or converting lands from non-agriculture uses to agriculture uses. The production of fertilizer for agriculture use. as well as things like irrigation, and here we speak in agriculture as well as forestry. So we also look at deforestation as well, reducing, emitting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. When you talk about methane, we can have methane from manure, the manure from the animals, burning of biomass, which is the vegetation. It could be man-made. It could be man-made burning. So when you cut your bush, you cut on your agriculture produce or the agriculture waste as well, and you burn that, you are emitting methane into the atmosphere. And of course, feed digestion, or we call it enteric fermentation, or by cattle. And then finally, in terms of the nitrous oxide emissions, that comes from the fertilized soils, as well as the production of fertilizers, as well as pesticides. So the more fertilizer and pesticides that we use, it contributes more to emitting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And then finally, manure. Again, manure. So manure produces both methane as well as nitrous oxide. So on the next slide, you would see here just this graphic that shows you basically like a farm where you're seeing the different gases that are being emitted from the different practices. So you see the trees are being cut down, releasing carbon dioxide. You're seeing the biomass and the waste, the food waste, agriculture waste, also emitting carbon dioxide, and then the burning of the waste, which is nitrous oxide, as well as methane and carbon dioxide. You also, even the tractor there's the use of the fuel in the tractor, and so that also contributes to reduce emitting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And of course, rice production as well contributes to emitting methane into the atmosphere. And of course the soil, tilling the soil and any significant disturbances to the soil would also reduce the carbon that is stored in soils. So those are the main areas or the main activities, agriculture-related activities that we find from the primary production that that emit greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So these are the main sources, right? So from that, we can easily think about some ways that we can reduce the contribution of the agriculture sector to greenhouse, so global warming, to climate change. And there are some very cost-effective ways that we can go about doing that. And we can go to the last slide, slide 4. So again, we'll do it as a gas focus, really. So in terms of the carbon dioxide, we can look at improving the management of croplands and reducing of the deforestation and forest degradation. So basically how you manage your crops. So there are different cropping methods, intercropping, crop rotation, and so on. There are ways that you can do it that doesn't involve or doesn't cause a lot of emissions of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So those are some things to consider for carbon dioxide. For methane and nitrous oxide, we have things like improving the animal production and management of livestock, and improve soil nutrient management. So that goes back again to the fertilizer. So for instance, instead of using artificial fertilizer, you can do composting, which helps increase the nutrient content of the soil, so you reduce the amount of artificial fertilizer that you would have to use, for instance. And then finally, another big one is carbon sequestration. That is another way to reduce the emissions from the agriculture sector. and that is in terms of afforestation and reforestation, so replanting of trees in areas where deforestation has taken place, and planting of trees in areas that were previously not trees did not exist previously. Restoration of degraded lands, so like I mentioned before with the soil, disturbances in the soil and soil degradation, and so restoring these degraded lands. Now you have the carbon dioxide being trapped back into the soil, so they pull in from the atmosphere, pulling it from the atmosphere to reduce the impact. And then conservation farming practices, which is a type of farming that looks at ensuring there's constant coverage of the soil to be able to manage soil, to maintain the soil moisture and soil nutrients, and intercropping and some different crop varieties and so on the land, where you can have better management of the soil, and you're using that now to trap the greenhouse gases. And we call these kind of like creating sinks for storing of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So those are the main basic areas in some of the main areas basically in primary production. But of course, when you think about even along the value chain, producing like the candies and juices, and so you use a lot of, they're very energy intensive practices, or use a lot of electricity, so maybe consider using, instead of electricity, using solar instead, or renewable energy sources to do those things. That would help reducing your footprint. Even things like the transporting of the produce, whether it's fresh produce, and so finding ways to reduce the footprint in terms of the amount of trips you're making, or even combining trips, so you're driving less and so on. So those are just some of the ways that some of the things that you can do to reduce our footprint when it comes to the agriculture sector. So thank you for now.
I want to just go back a bit, because one of the things that was mentioned as it relates to the emission of greenhouse gas is composting, and that does emit methane. But it is also recommended that composting might be a way of sort of reducing it as compared to using the chemical fertilizers. Just talk to us a little bit about the composting and maybe how it reduces the amount of greenhouse gases emitted into the atmosphere.
Okay, so when it comes to composting, this is when the more beneficial way to use it is when it's being put back into the soil, not just covering the soil, but actually integrated into the soil. So you build the soil nutrient content, and with that, instead of having things on the surface where you're releasing it into the atmosphere, it's being trapped into the soil once it's integrated into the soil. So it's being trapped there. Instead of having it just covering, you don't just throw it out and leave it there. You actually till it into the soil, and then that way it's trapped instead of going into the atmosphere.
Right. I mean, a major part of agriculture is livestock, the livestock industry. People need meat. They depend on meat, beef, and so in probably more than any other. But we're here learning livestock emits methane. We know methane is quite a dangerous one as it relates to global warming. What do we do then?
Well, I mean, that is
should we stop eating meat, or?
So that's a very controversial topic. It has been very controversial globally, actually, because you can't tell people don't eat meat, but you can probably reduce your meat, especially red meat, beef intake. So if you're having it every day, maybe you can have it once a week instead, or once a month, to kind of reduce your footprint a bit. Of course, course, if you want to be diehard, you can choose to cut it out completely, which we would all be cheering along with. But some people, it really is a choice, and a very difficult choice for some people. And sometimes there are places where that's the main source of protein in your diet. And so we also have to consider those things as well in terms of how it's being used in the environment that it is in. So so it is advised to have it less often instead of none at all.
Yeah. One quick one before I bring in Terry here. It is also believed that a lot of the land clearing, most of it is for livestock rearing rather than the growing of crops. I mean, yes, crops are grown as well, and maybe we need to do more of that, but because of the large quantity of land that is used for livestock rearing, that is a problem. So we're saying here what? If we reduce on the amount of meat that we eat, less cattle will be reared, or less livestock will be reared, and so we could help with the problem. Is that what we're going with that, Martina?
Actually, in a way, so if you're producing less, then you need less land. So definitely that is obviously one of the ways to think about it as well. But yeah, so once the cattle are there, just their digestive process is releasing. That's where the methane comes from, the digestive process of the cattle. Okay. The CO2 comes from the land clearing. Oh. So
Terry, you want to come in here? I'm sure you have a question you want to throw at Martina.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Martina. Great presentation. But we have to feed the world. Okay, our population is growing, and we must feed the world. And so if we're saying the agriculture based on increased production, and so we've seen some increase in production of the gases. But do we have any? Or can you reference any studies that show trends, Martina? Do we have that as yet? Any studies?
Yes, actually, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, they track the greenhouse gas emissions from the agriculture sector in the FAO Stat platform. However, and they produce almost annual reports on that. So I think the last one I saw is that the emissions from the agriculture sector has been decreasing, but in a very small way over the past few years. But there's also the fact that they don't have all of the data from all of the countries globally. So the information is to be taken with not to be taken fully, because they don't have. There's a lot of countries are not capturing the data that they need to be able to produce this report very accurately, or they just don't have the systems in place, or they don't have the capacity to do that in the countries. So this information is mainly from the developed countries and some of the larger developing countries that actually do track the processes. So, and then of course, for the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, all countries are reporting on their greenhouse gas emissions. The agriculture sector is a big sector in many of the countries, and many of the reports from most of the countries. So in some ways they're able to capture some of the information, but many times we see that, especially in the smaller countries, that we don't have the systems in place to really capture the information from the agriculture sector as is needed. Because, for instance, here we have a lot of small farms in Grenada. It's very difficult for us to track how much methane, how much exactly heads of cattle we have, how much land is being cleared, and so on. So all of that information that is needed to really create the trends that we really would like to see is not really available. So that's one of the things that countries need to work on and are working on to improve their reporting, so that we can really be able to accurately track the contribution of the agriculture sector.
Okay. Thank you, Martina. Terry, you wanted anything else?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
All right. So I know Daniel is itching to comment, but Daniel, hold your horses still. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to look at the impacts, so the impacts that climate change has on agriculture. And of course, Mr. Maxime will share that with us. So stay with us. We'll be back with you in just a moment.
You're watching Our Climate Reality on GBN Television, brought to you in part by Republic Bank Limited, Hubbards, and Classic Lighting.
When a loved one passes on, we all need the comfort, support, and guidance of a trusted friend. You can rely on LaCour Brothers Funeral Home. We provide a personalized professional service that exceeds all expectations. Our dedicated staff responds to your every need with the greatest detail, ensuring affordability with a variety of options. Our upgraded state-of-the-art facilities, spacious air-conditioned chapel with live internet streaming, a modern, environmentally safe crematorium, the only of its kind on island, private viewing spaces, large on-site repast center, a modern transportation fleet. Join our burial society today and make personalized arrangements for that final moment. As you prepare to enter your loved one into eternal rest, visit or call LaCour Brothers Funeral Home and select a package that brings added comfort to the entire family. LaCour Brothers Funeral Home and Burial Society, continuing a tradition of excellence.
If there was ever a time to keep and stay healthy, it's now. We at Hills and Valley are here to help you take deliberate steps to maintain your health. We stay true to maintaining the most comprehensive rates while stocking the widest range of medicines and health devices, including personal protective equipment. There are so many benefits shopping with us. You get great savings through discounts for senior citizens and reward cards for loyal customers. Ask about owning yours today. Visit us at Halifax and Grenville Street, St. George, Jubilee Street opposite the Grenville Bus Terminal, and at Hillsborough, Carriacou. Our wholesale distribution on Halifax Street also stocks the widest range of pharmaceuticals. We are with you on the hills and in the valleys. We are Hills and Valley Pharmacy.
Whether you're shopping for hardware, building materials, and appliances, Hubbard's Building Supplies at Grand Anse is the place to shop. With improved facilities, increased parking, wider variety of products, and a trendy and spacious layout, catering for all your shopping needs. Why wait? Visit Hubbard's Building Supplies today. Now open Mondays to Fridays, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. and Saturdays, 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. Quality service, affordable prices.
Building or renovating your home or business? Why not use clean, renewable energy? Install solar panels to power your home and office and see your energy costs go down and your savings go up. Using renewable solar-powered energy protects our environment, reduces our carbon footprint, and slows the devastating impact of climate change. Republic Bank can help to finance construction and renovations that make use of renewable energy. Visit any Republic Bank branch and ask about renewable energy financing options today.
Republic Bank, we're the one for you.
Solar Vision is the champion. We lighten up the whole Caribbean. Solar Vision is the champion. We lighten the whole Caribbean. The ultimate solution to get rid of pollution. We're going green to be healthy. Going green for security. Going green for prosperity. Going green with Solar Vision. Going green.
Available at Grenada Trade Center, Montrouge, St. George. For more information, call 444-5291 or 404-9012.
You're watching Our Climate Reality on GBN Television, brought to you in part by Republic Bank Limited, Hubbards, and Classic Lighting. Our Climate Reality is brought to you with the kind compliments of Republic Bank.
Welcome back, everyone. Episode 5 of our Climate Reality, Climate Change and Agriculture. And of course, Ms. Matilda Duncan just shared with us some ways in which agriculture does impact climate change. What we're going to do now is to invite Mr. Steve Maxime, and he will share with us information on how climate change impacts agriculture and food security and how these impacts can be managed. Mr. Maxime?
Thank you, Godfrey. Thank you, Martina, for that excellent presentation. But I must declare some bias before I even say another word. Anyone who has seen an email from me in the last 7 years would know that my email signature says this: with respect to climate change, agriculture is neither villain nor victim, but indeed the sleeping vanguard. So when we talk about the impacts of agriculture on climate change, we have to be very conscious of the type of agriculture that we're talking about. The figures that Martina would have quoted are based primarily on industrial agriculture, where large areas are cleared for the production of livestock, etc. So that I think a word of caution, which she included, is necessary when we start talking about the contribution of agriculture to greenhouse gas emissions overall, whether it be through compost or through enteric fermentation, as she so expertly mentioned. With respect to the impacts of climate change now on agriculture, what we are really talking about are the conditions that make agriculture more difficult and make proper agricultural production, climate-smart agriculture, more intricate. So you're talking about the impacts of heat, not just on your crop production or your livestock production, but on the workers as well. I think far too often we keep thinking about the impact of heat on agriculture and just looking at crops and what it has done to the soil in terms of, heating up soils and what it has done to things like the thermal indexing in animals, where we know that the heat impacts animals, their productivity drops in egg laying or meat production or what have you, drops as well. So that one of the major impacts would be heat, straight old-fashioned heat. Drought is another major one. And the thing about drought is that it is an incipient type of problem, in that you never hear about a drought emergency. Drought is something that sort of creeps up on you, and that you may well be going through a phase, a couple of weeks without water, when it is not even considered a meteorological drought. So that drought is one of those that slips in, and it's only when you're right smack in the middle of it that you realize, hey, we're in a drought period, and that impact can be very significant. So you're talking about heat, drought. The impact of climate change on food production generally has to do with the changes in wind circulation patterns. And this is an area that is often overlooked in terms of what it does in terms of pest and disease spread. We have measurements now that we can tell that the circulatory patterns are changing, both aerial and marine as well. Because I know that we're going to get stuck into conversations about crop production and livestock production and forget fisheries at our own misfortune. So that even in terms of fisheries, there are impacts that will be felt in the fishing industry, so that you have coral bleaching, coastal erosion, all of these impacted by climate that would decrease your spawning areas, your food source, your feed source for your small fish, which impact your larger fish, which impact fisheries generally. So you're talking about impacts that are common, incipient, and that have devastating effect on your agriculture if you're not prepared. If you're not prepared in terms of the mechanisms that you use in your production processes. So you're talking about the extreme weather events, which, as you know, has a major impact of climate change would be your extreme weather events, your severe flooding episodes, your severe hurricanes, and there's no drainage system that can deal with those kinds of impact. When you're talking about stationary systems that just deluge complete areas, then there's no drainage system in the world that can really handle that. So you have to be prepared now for plants and animal production that is going to be more resilient under those kinds of conditions. So in terms of impacts, we're talking about heat, drought, precipitation, extreme events, changes in circulatory patterns, and a number of secondary impacts, which, as I said, we won't go into the whole long list now, but just to say that for each of these impacts that I may mention, there are countermeasures that we have in place that we are practicing currently that will help us alleviate some of the negative impacts. So we are talking about issues such as increase load. Sure, you hear me correctly. Increase allergen load in terms of what would be the impact on the farmers and fisher folk. We have now increased pulmonary diseases, not just in terms of the workers, but for your animals as well. We have seen what the increase in vector-borne diseases can do. We are also seeing the impacts on the quality, and this is another area that gets sidelined. We now know that unhealthy soils, and unhealthy soils in the sense that these soils that have been degraded by some of these same climate impacts that we're referring to, have decreased microorganisms, and the microorganism composition changes. And we now know, and there's documentary evidence to prove it, that your soil microbiome, which is, the agents and so in the soil, the microbes in the soil, bear direct relationship to your gut microbiome. So that you find that some of the impacts of climate change are not only in terms of the yield, but the quality of the yield. So you're now having produce that is not as nutritious. And I hasten to duck the first part of the introduction from Godfrey. I never talk about food security. I'm not interested in food security at all. I'm interested in nutrition security. So that the idea that if you get 2,000 calories, you're food secure is rubbish to me, because you could get those 2,000 calories from, I suppose, plenty of soft drinks. And I don't think that is what we need when we talk about food security. So in terms of nutrition security, climate impacts your nutrition security by directly impacting the quality, the nutrient density of the food that you're producing. And that, to me, is the most significant area. The yield reductions are manageable, but I think the quality reductions are the ones that silently go under the radar. So without taking up the entire program, I just want to leave you with those few thoughts until we come around to the next round. Thank you, Godfrey.
Right. Thank you very much, Steve. Let me bring in Terry here. Terry, I'm sure you may want to ask Steve something on his presentation.
I just want to make a comment here, that in terms of he mentioned drought, and sometimes you're in a drought and you don't even know. But just to comment that the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology, they have developed an early warning system for droughts, and they can actually predict when and where there's going to be a drought in the region. So I just want to make that comment here, God.
Yeah, and I want to agree with you. I mean, the work that Adrian Trotman and his team does at CIMH is legendary. What I was talking about in terms of whether it's an incipient drought or not is that you can have all the forecasts you want, but if you go to each of the island territories within CARICOM, it is very rare where you have a Ministry of Agriculture being able to declare a drought because you didn't have rainfall for, let's say, 10 days, or 12 days, or 15 days. Everyone working in the sector knows that to call a drought literally has all kinds of implications. So when I said it's incipient, it's all good and well for us to have the predictions out of CIMA that says, you're going to have 14% less rainfall, 50% less rainfall. But the reality on the ground, in terms of the farmer support and so, comes long after. In other words, you have to be in it to know it, right? So that's the point I was making. Not that we are not able to predict it, but even when we are in it, it is still a slow-moving process to get the type of relief. In other words, you don't get drought relief at the same pace that you get flood relief, because flood relief is immediate, instantaneous, and visible. Drought relief takes a longer time because you have to wait until the crops wither on the vine, for you to get a response. So that's the context I was saying. But we do have the science to predict it.
Mm-hmm. Steve, I just want to.
I hope that answers your check.
Yeah. Now there are agricultural systems that depends solely on rain. Let's talk a little bit about the seasonal patterns, the changing patterns, seasonal patterns on rain-fed agricultural systems.
Yes, well, I mean, I don't want to repeat what I said, but the legendary work of CIMH, under the leadership of people like Adrian Trotman, so is, again, as I said before, legendary. So that we have the mechanisms, we have enough, I shouldn't say enough, we have significant numbers of weather stations positioned, we have a number of predictive models coming out of the MONA Climate Studies Group, and so where we are in a position to now recognize which areas are going to be water stressed, even more significantly water stressed. And then the type of measures we're talking about now have to do with water management. Notice I didn't say anything catchy like water harvesting. I'm saying water management, because it makes very little sense if you harvest water and then use it in the same irresponsible way as you're using it before the drought or before the reduced rainfall. So in proper water management systems, farmers are going to be using the water that they do get and that they do store more appropriately, so that you're not just concerned about irrigation, which is just the application of the water, but we are interested now in water management. How are we going to be recycling some of that water? How are we going to ensure that our drainage system doesn't complicate or enrich the reef concerns, so that you have farmers farming on hillsides, and so you add all of that recently harvested water and you're washing all your nutrients all the way down to the reef and impacting fisheries, etc. So I want to agree that within the Caribbean islands, you have very few countries that have above ground storage, lakes and that type of thing. So a lot of us depend on groundwater and the responsible use of that water once harvested by whichever means, whether it's harvested from underground flows or riverine flows.
Okay.
So I hope I didn't carry on too long, but
right.
I think we needed to discuss that.
Thank you very much,
Godfrey.
Steve. Yes, Terry.
Sorry, go right ahead, Godfrey.
Okay, right. So we take a short break and we'll come back and then we'll invite Daniel to speak on, we'll take the discussion home to Grenada. Stay with us, folks. We'll be back in a moment.
You're watching Our Climate Reality on GBN Television, brought to you in part by Republic Bank Limited, Hubbards, and Classic Lighting.
But when you need someone to help you to your feet, I'll be that beacon to your highest peak. Oh, I'll be right next to you, no, I will never leave. Come on, take my hands, we got everything we need. Cause you can look to me whenever you're in need. Just call on me and I'll be on my way. I'll be by your side, never to divide. The light that shines our way. Wherever you road leads, we'll make your dreams come true. Next time, next time, next time. Next to you.
Nexa Credit Union, with you wherever your road leads.
Whether you're shopping for hardware, building materials, and appliances, Hubbard's Building Supplies at Grand Anse is the place to shop. With improved facilities, increased parking, wider variety of products, and a trendy and spacious layout, catering for all your shopping needs. Why wait? Visit Hubbard's Building Supplies today. Now open Mondays to Fridays, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. and Saturday, 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. Hubbard's. Quality service, affordable prices.
Solar Vision is the champion. We lighten up the whole Caribbean. Solar Vision is the champion. We lighten the whole Caribbean. The ultimate solution to get rid of pollution. We going green to be healthy. Going green for security. Going green for prosperity. Going green with Solar Vision. We going green.
Available at Grenada Trade Center, Montrouge, St. George. For more information, 444-5291 or 404-9012.
Building or renovating your home or business? Why not use clean, renewable energy? Install solar panels to power your home and office and see your energy costs go down and your savings go up. Using renewable solar-powered energy protects our environment, reduces our carbon footprint, and slows the devastating impact of climate change. Republic Bank can help to finance construction and renovations that make use of renewable energy. Visit any Republic Bank branch and ask about renewable energy financing options today.
Republic Bank. We're the one for you.
Our Climate Reality is brought to you with the kind compliments of Republic Bank Limited, Hubbard's, and Classic Lighting.
Welcome back, everyone. Episode 5, Climate Change and Agriculture. Daniel, you've listened to both Martina and Steve. I want to take the discussion home. Climate smart agriculture in Grenada. What is happening here and what some of the agricultural approaches to this changing climatic conditions? Talk to us.
Yeah. I have to be brief. I realize the time is running. Yes, essentially, climate smart approaches to mitigate against the effect of climate change is one of the approaches that has been put forward as a way of, ensuring that, your agricultural system, it becomes much more resilient. And clearly, I think at a global level, I remember in 2014, I attended a meeting in The Hague where, they launched the Alliance for the Climate Smart Agriculture, Global Climate Smart Agriculture, And, Grenada was fortunate in that, I think we started, I think in 2014, they had a project called Integrated Climate Smart, Integrated Climate Change Adaptation Strategy, where, the UNDP and the Ministry of, the Federal Ministry of the Environment in Germany put forward some resources and to support, climate smart agriculture approaches and other things like that. And so the honest truth is, climate change is real, and the extent to which farmers could practice some smart approaches will determine how successful the farming enterprise will be. I'll just go through some areas and just describe them briefly. For example, adoption of a no-burning policy. As I think Martina may have described before, if you're clearing lands and you just decide to burn, all this gas is going into the atmosphere. And in addition to that, given the fact that one of the effects of climate change we've seen is a lot of flash flood, rain coming down, it's such brutal force that you just wash a lot of your topsoil. And even the soil contains a lot of fertilizer that you had applied, and that would certainly end up in the marine environment, causing all kind of problems in the marine environment, including damage to coral reefs, seabeds, and even the marine resources. So that is one of the things. And no burning. Unfortunately, in Grenada, they have for anybody to burn anything, they need a fire license. And I think the ministry could regulate that very, very well. When people come, just tell them, please. There's a fire we prefer. If you could use the waste to make compost, for example, rather than burning. And in one of the things, implementing drought-resistant system and practices that capture, store, and conserve water and watersheds. For example, forestry is responsible for watershed management. You want to, ensure you do forestation instead of deforestation. Because that is what protect, a lot of our water systems. And for example, I make mention of the ICAS project that was implemented about 8-9 years ago. And one of the things I remember, they did a fantastic project in Maribo where you have a proliferation of small, vegetable farmers, and they do not have no, natural river in the area. And what they did, there is a massive church in Maribo. And what they did, the project were able to do a rainwater harvesting, build a massive tank and so forth, so you had access to, to that water. Because the honest truth, you cannot have a good agriculture system without having access to water, whether it's natural precipitation, rainfall that is, or access to irrigation. So that is an important thing. One of the things, and Martina had made mention of it, that you have to move away from this monoculture, which lends itself to excessive use of fertilizer, having more prone to pests and diseases that would necessitate using excess agrochemicals. So it's better to have a system in which you could do crop rotation. And if you do crop rotation, one of the things we realize that some specific diseases are associated with specific crops. So when you do crop rotation, you break the cycle. One of the things that has been noted with in climate change is with the higher temperature, you have shorter cycle of the of a lot of the insects, and in addition to much more cycles, so you have a proliferation of insects, and insect is very damaging to agriculture by the damage they cause and so forth. So the problem is to have more integrated agriculture production with much more, much more biodiversity instead of doing monocropping. And it is said that, for example, in Grenada, we have a large. Grenada has always been very strong in terms of tree crop, like spices and so forth. And it is said that even the nutmegs in our way, they are inherently climate smart approach because, you have the trees, you sell them fertilize and use pesticides and nutmeg, and they will trap all this carbon and thing rather than having them, they sequester carbon in a sense. So that makes it a good crop. So the idea is how it is we could even build on that, have much more tree crops and things planted rather than other crops. Watershed protection. How we could protect our watershed protection to ensure that our farmers in the final analysis could have more access to water is by, you avoid cutting down trees unnecessarily. Only recently I was indicating to some people in some jurisdiction, to cut a tree you have to get permission. So we cannot take our trees for granted, we have to protect them. More effective drainage system. One of the things with sometimes rain falls, but the effectiveness of rainfall is given by treating. One, their quantity, the intensity, and the duration. If a lot of rain falls in a short duration, it's destructive rain, because they will not get sufficient to filter into the soil and so forth. So to mitigate against that, you need good drainage system. Like before you go to a farm and you see nice laid out drainage system, something we need to improve on to get rid of the excessive rain, excessive water. Again, that was a practice that was very prevalent before, planting windbreaks in some strategic area, because one of the effects of, as we see, whether it's hurricane or strong wind, is the effect of the wind. You topple, for example, when you have crops like bananas that you could just push and they fall, they're very vulnerable to toppling. You need to protect them. Planting, what you could do, plant commercial trees, so that the trees there would not be, it could generate income. So effective windbreaks. Most soil conservation methods, given the fact that you see all these flash floods and things in the current situation with climate change, you need to have, for example, terracing, strip cropping. With the terracing, especially, topography is basically undulating in Grenada. So you want to prepare soil in a way to protect them from excess rain, so that when the rain falls, the terracing is like step-like. They wouldn't just come down with a gush. So in so doing, you protect your soil. Imagine 1 inch of soil takes about 5,000 years to form, and it could disappear in a flash. So soil conservation methods. And practice wider use of water conservation. I think both Martin and I think Steve mentioned that. For example, there's something called fill capacity, the maximum amount of water that the soil could retain after heavy downpour. So even though you're using water through irrigation from the river or stream, you should take that into account. You don't have to irrigate whole day. Water is a scarce commodity. In some countries like Jamaica that have a integrated water management scheme, they monitor the usage of water by everybody. So I think it's something that Grenada have to put in place. More prudent management of agrochemicals. Excess agrochemicals could be very, very damaging, as we see. It is estimated that 75% of the greenhouse gases in Grenada, not in Grenada, in agriculture, is as a result of the use of fertilizers. So we have to minimize. Quite apart from effect on the greenhouse gases, the emission, excess fertilizers could be lead to soil acidity and all kind of problem. When a soil is acidic, that means a lot of nutrients, very important for the plants, is in a form that is unavailable, like phosphate. So, and they're expensive, so you don't want to waste it in a very prudent manner. And Martina mentioned, why not use organic compost? You combine it with you. If you have to use the inorganic fertilizer. Use of drought-resistant varieties. I know there is some vegetable seeds which are sold, and it's very tolerant to dry conditions, because increasingly we've seen a lot of some of those coming on the market. And I think one of the things that Grenada would have to work with its other counterpart in terms of CARD, Caribbean Agriculture Research and Development Institute, is to look for solution, for example, a lot of, because really temperature, plants, it has been shown that a lot of the current varieties, vegetables included, they cannot function very well with the higher temperatures that we have been experiencing. So sometimes there is abortion of flowers and all sorts of things. And if you don't have flowers developing well, they cannot produce fruits eventually. So these are some of the things I think that we have been seeing that has been put forward as mitigating measures to counteract climate change, because climate change is real, and we have to, if it is that we want our agriculture system to be resilient, we have to encourage farmers to move in that direction. Another thing I didn't mention, education. Education is key. Have our extension officers receive the requisite training, and so that they could bring those to at the farmer level and let them move forward.
Right, and I know we can go on, Daniel, but we also have to be conscious of time. Yes, yeah. So what I'm going to do now, we have to apologize. Terry has lost his internet connection, so he's fallen off, but he'll be back with us next week. I want to invite both Steve and Martina to probably comment a bit on some of the things Daniel mentioned before we wrap for tonight. So let's start with Martina. Any comments on Daniel's presentation?
Thank you, Godfrey, and thank you, St. Louis, for your good presentation. I think you hit the nail on the head in all cases. There is a lot happening already in Grenada, and I know that there are some farmers that are very knowledgeable even on climate change and how it could affect them. And they have different apps that they use, different systems in place, and so on. So I think even using them along with the extension officers, as Mr. Lewis mentioned, would be a step in the right direction in really integrating more climate resilient practices into the agriculture sector to both reduce emissions from the sector as well as reduce risk from climate change. Thank you.
Thanks. Steve, in addition to commenting on Daniel's presentation, the citizenry, so to speak, if they're interested in playing a part in helping in this whole climate change issue, what can be done by way of participation? So that's in addition to you commenting on Daniel's presentation.
Sure, I'd want to tackle the latter part of the question first. I think what we have missed in all the discussion this evening is the very appropriate SIAP project that is currently in operation, which specifically deals with climate smart agriculture. That project was able to develop climate smart agriculture training processes for 4-H members and for their own extension staff, so that within Grenada we have comprehensive climate smart agriculture technologies, including a web-based application, something called CSAC, that is listed on the UE's climatetools.tech website, so that anyone wanting to see more about climate smart agriculture, a comprehensive climate smart agriculture as practiced within the region and endorsed by both UE and CARDI, then that would be an excellent place to look. So I want to say that in terms of the mass of the citizenry, I think keeping close to projects like SIAP, dealing with both ICA, FAO, and the Ministry of Agriculture, we are in a better position now. And even through the Ministry of Education and the 4-H movement, because the 4-H movement just took receipt of a comprehensive climate smart agriculture training manual geared specifically for the 4-H movement, and this was based on a comprehensive training program across Grenada, Carriacou, and Petite Martinique, sponsored by SIAP a couple of months ago. So I think we are in good hands, and I think that a comprehensive climate smart agriculture will be part of the solution, just part of the solution of the impacts of climate on agriculture. Thanks.
Any comments on Daniel's presentation, Steve?
Yeah, that's what I said. I was saying that he mentioned most of the aspects of what a comprehensive climate smart agriculture would involve, but I'm saying that there's a specific app available, there are specific technologies available that are being increasingly used throughout the Caribbean and indeed here in Grenada through the SIAP project.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, we're out of time, and we have to leave it here for this evening. Just before we go, Daniel, 30 seconds, closing comments.
Well, quite famous. Really commend you for doing a program like that, because climate change is real, it's impactful, negatively impacting farmers out there. I've seen it, and I sincerely hope that many of the farmers who practice farming will be logging on to you every Wednesday, because I think it's really, really something that they have to take seriously, because in the long run, I think it will impact their livelihood, their bottom line, the quality of life, and everything. And certainly, in fact, Grenada food and nutrition security. Mrs. Maxime should realize I said Grenada food and nutrition security. Nutrition must be mentioned.
Thank you, Daniel. Martina, 30 seconds.
Okay, thank you. I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to be on the show, and thank you for at least having this platform where really relevant information is shared with the general public, to try and fill one of the gaps where we have some knowledge gaps in society. Climate change is an issue that we cannot tackle alone. So as was mentioned, we need to work together, stay close to the projects, stay close to the farmers, the extension officers, and really try and work together to really reduce the impact of climate change on us.
Thank you, Martina. And Steve, the final word?
Final word, thanks to everyone concerned.
Thank you very much, Steve. Let me also express my thanks to you three for accepting the invitation to be on the program and to share with the general public such very, very pertinent information. We thank you again to our viewers, our listeners. We thank you for staying with us, and of course you can join us again next Wednesday for another episode. We say special thanks to our partners for making this program possible: Republic Bank, Hubbard's, and also Classic Lighting. And of course, I could not make this possible without the great help and assistance of Mr. Leon Charles. So thank you, everyone. Thanks again. Until next week, Wednesday, when we look at climate change and water. Have a good night. All the best.
You're watching Our Climate Reality on GBN Television, brought to you in part by Republic Bank Limited, Hubbard's, and Classic Lighting.
Whether you're shopping for hardware, building materials, and appliances, Hubbard's Building Supplies at Grandans is the place to shop. With improved facilities, increased parking, wider variety of products, and a trendy and spacious layout, catering for all your shopping needs. Why wait? Visit Hubbard's Building Supplies. Now open Mondays to Fridays, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. and Saturdays, 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. Hubbard's. Quality service. Affordable prices.
Solar Vision is the champion. We're lighting up the whole Caribbean. Solar Vision is the champion. We lighting the whole Caribbean. The ultimate solution to get rid of pollution. We're going green to be healthy. Going green for security. Going green for prosperity. Going green with Solar Vision. We're going green.
Available at Grenada Trade Center, Montrouge, St. George. For more information, call 444-5291 or 404-9012.
Building or renovating your home or business? Why not use clean, renewable energy? Install solar panels to power your home and office and see your energy costs go down and your savings go up. Using renewable solar-powered energy protects our environment, reduces our carbon footprint, and slows the devastating impact of climate change. Republic Bank can help to finance construction and renovations that make use of renewable energy. Visit any Republic Bank branch and ask about renewable energy financing options today.
Republic Bank, we're the one for you.